Hello, people. Finished a book, The Anarchy, subtitled The East India Company, Corporate Violence and the Pillage of an Empire. This was just a wonderful book. Took me about 6 days to finish this. Not because it was so long, but I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. It was wonderful. This is what I've been looking for. This was published in 2019, and I have read one other book by this author. His name is William Dalrymple, and I read White Moguls by Dalrymple, and it was also a wonderful book, but it didn't go into so much of the military history. It did a little bit. This was like the military history of the Raj, along with the political history, which is the way history should be told. That's how I feel about it. 397 pages. The first paragraph, I have a little bit of the introduction there. All it does is it talks about some of the words that have entered the English language that were originally from the Indian subcontinent. And in that first paragraph there, it says loot. The word loot comes from the Indian language. I don't know if it's Persian or Urdu or what, but L-O-O-T, which means pillage, which is what the East India Company did. They just pillaged an entire, almost a whole continent. Very important to this history is this guy Nadir Shah. In 1739, he comes from Afghanistan, and he sacks Delhi, and it's the English are there at that time, but they just have toeholds in India, and they're supplicants. They ask to do business there. It's a little bit different there before this Nadir Shah wrecks the Mughal power base, and the Mughal king, for want of a better word, used to sit on this peacock throne, and the peacock throne was a very interesting thing, and I'm sure that there's books written entirely about the peacock throne, and the diamonds and the gems that were embedded in this throne. The throne is now in Baghdad, or no, Tehran. So it's got a whole history all of its own. But after the Shah guy wrecks Delhi, then the Mughal power is fractured, and the English are able to do what they did, which is pit one group against another, ally themselves with a group, screw them, ally themselves with another group, and just kind of leapfrog across this continent, and end up taking over. The book ends like in the early 1800s. I wish it would have kept going. I really do. But there is a list of other books that Dalrymple has wrote, and I'll have to look for some of them. Even though I'll probably have to buy them brand new, which kind of sucks. That means you're going to spend a lot of money. Just a few weeks ago, I finished the book, The Social History of the Raj. And the social history of the Raj alluded to the Black Hole of Calcutta, but didn't tell me what it was. Now, if you grew up in the UK, you probably get taught that in school, but here in America, we don't. We've all heard of the Black Hole of Calcutta, but here I'm in my 60s and I didn't even know what it was. In fact, when I got done with that book, that 502-page social history of the Raj, I asked my wife, I said, do you know what this Black Hole of Calcutta was? She says, no, I've heard of it, but I don't know what it was. Thanks to this book, now I know what it was. Page 106, it really wasn't the great, huge deal, but the English had lost a battle. Some of them had been taken prisoner. They crowded them into a prison cell with only one window, and a bunch of them died, of heat stroke is what happened. And I have the second paragraph here. The numbers are unclear and much debated. Hallwell, who wrote a highly colored account of the black hole in 1758 and began the mythologizing of the event, wrote that one woman and 145 company men were shoved inside, of whom 123 died. This was clearly an exaggeration. The most painstaking recent survey of the evidence concludes 64 people entered the black hole and that 21 survived. Among the young men who did not come out was 19-year-old Stair Dalrymple from North Berwick, who only 2 years earlier had been complaining of Calcutta's cost of living and dreaming of becoming governor. And I don't know what it is about that Dalrymple name that I look at it and I can't pronounce it. Before I started making this video, I did the Google pronounce thing, and it's much easier than it looks. Third paragraph, 235, and I have Johnson, and I can't remember what this is. Third paragraph. I added that in after I wrote down Clive. Clive is one of the very important figures. He was really just an adventurer. He had no military background. He goes to India, and because of his forceful personality, he ends up being a leader for the EIC. And Johnson is the guy that I read about a few weeks ago, the guy that wrote this big, huge English, it's a dictionary of the English language, 2,000-page dictionary, and Johnson was in the book, The Club. And he writes about Clive, who ends up committing suicide. Clive is pretty young. He's ill, and that may have had something to do with it, but Johnson doesn't think so. Clive's body was removed at the dead of night from Berkeley Square to the village church in Morton Say, where he was born. There the suicide was buried in a secret nighttime ceremony in an unmarked grave, without a plaque, in the same church where he had been baptized half a century earlier. Clive left no suicide note, but Samuel Johnson reflected the widespread view as to his motives. Clive, he wrote, had acquired his fortune by such crimes that his consciousness of them impelled him to cut his own throat. And my next note is, this is how to tell history. And I kind of diss on the social history of the Raj, mainly due to them only alluding to Calcutta and Plassey. Now, Plassey is a very important battle where the English, after Plassey, say, hey, we don't really have to pay attention to these gigantic armies because our system is so superior to theirs. The middle of the book is a series of Mughal rulers try to reunite the empire, ally themselves, and to then fight the company. It's like a 40-year period, what they call the Carnatic Wars. And the only time that the book threatened to lose me was reading about these Carnatic Wars, because they go on forever, and I don't know, when I'm reading names that are hard to pronounce and spellings that are unfamiliar, for me then it's really hard to keep track of these people. There's a big battle at Buxar, B-U-X-A-R, where the English defeat 3 Mughal armies that have combined. And then I have a note here that says, Clive sails on the Kent. A great historian, when they write a book, no matter where somebody sails from or how insignificant you may think it is, they're going to give me the name of the boat the name of the ship that this person sailed on. I love that. Carnatic Wars, fourth paragraph, 216, the famine. There's a great famine in India, and it goes on for several years. The monsoon fails them for several years. 216. Why do I think that's the wrong page? Fourth paragraph. All through the stifling summer of 1770, the people went on dying, wrote Sir William Hunter. The husbandmen sold their cattle. They sold their implements of agriculture. They devoured their seed grain. They sold their sons and daughters, till at length no buyers of children could be found. They ate the leaves of the trees and the grass of the field. And in June, the resident at the Durbar affirmed that the living were feeding off the dead. Day and night a torrent of famished and disease-ridden wretches poured into the great cities, so that soon the streets were blocked up with promiscuous heaps of the dying and the dead. Some of the Mughal rulers tried to feed the dying people. To be fair, some of the guys from the company tried to feed them too. And I have a note here that says 1,000 million, because I have noticed that any book written by an American author would write 1 billion instead of 1,000 million. European writers will say 1,000 million, 2,000 million. To me, that makes a lot more sense. Cornwallis comes into the picture soon after he surrenders to George Washington at Yorktown. He comes in and he fights a guy named Tipu Tib. And Tipu Tib is a pretty interesting guy. I'm sure that there could be an entire book written about Tipu Tib. Tipu Tib is a Maratha, and there are several wars against the Marathas. And Cornwallis is pretty successful. After him, the Wellesley brothers take over. And the younger Wellesley, of course, Arthur, it becomes the Duke of Wellington later on. I have the second paragraph, page 350. I just finished this book just minutes ago, and I'm going to start on another one that is sort of will be the same thing. Here, between the Watergate and the inner ramparts of the fort, Tipu stood to make what even his most hostile British opponents acknowledged was his gallant last stand. A party of redcoats had forced their way between the gates, and one grenadier, seeing a gold buckle sparkling on the waist of the wounded man, tried to grab at it and received a last fatal sword slash from the Sultan in return. Seconds later, one of his companions shot Tipu at point-blank range through the temple. After 4 wars against the company over a period of 32 years, the Tiger of Mysore finally fell, sword in hand, among the heaps of dead and dying men. And just because they say redcoats, that doesn't mean that there was an English soldier. They had, plenty of native Indians, sepoy regiments that had been trained in European-style warfare. Second paragraph, page 354, the footnote on 351. Some secondary sources erroneously have Tipu's body being discovered by Arthur Wellesley. That it was Bard who found Tipu is made quite clear in the letter Bard wrote to General Harris. It can be found in Montgomery Martin, the dispatches, minutes, and correspondence of Marquis Wellesley. Arthur Wellesley's role in the taking of Seringapatam has in general been exaggerated by some historians who have inflated his importance with the benefit of hindsight and in view of his subsequent European triumphs. Baird and Harris were the 2 ranking officers who at the time were credited with defeating Tipu. And that's not the only place that Wellesley gets inflated importance. That's the only conspiracy theory that I subscribe to is Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, shouldn't really be given credit for winning the Battle of Waterloo. At the very least, it should be shared between him and Blucher. At the most, it should be given to Blucher. Second paragraph, 354. Today, Tipu's capital is grazing land, and very little remains as witness of the former splendor of the kingdom of the Tiger of Mysore, the single Indian ruler who did more than any other to resist the onslaught of the company. The future Duke of Wellington at the Battle of Assaye, second paragraph, 371. I don't know how to pronounce all of this. The Major General himself had 2 horses shot under him and had several of his immediate staff killed around him by the clouds of grape the Maratha gunners sent in his direction. One large round shot just missed Wellesley as he was crossing the Kelna, but decapitated his dragoon orderly as he paused midstream. The horrifying sight of the headless horseman features in many accounts of the battle, the body being kept in its seat by the valise, holsters, and other appendages of a cavalry saddle, and it was some time before the terrified horse could rid himself of the ghastly burden. There's a guy named Shah Alam that figures throughout this whole history. He's a survivor. He doesn't wield much power for most of his life. In fact, he's in Delhi, and it's taken over by a guy actually that Shah Alam had saved as a child. And he's blinded. The guy fucking cuts out his eyes with a knife. But Shah Alam is still alive at the end of this book. And this first-hand account that I'm going to read is written by an English officer who is, his job is to accompany Shah Alam, the blind Shah Alam. And that's on page 387. At this time I was constantly by the side of the king, and could not but admire the extreme of nobility in his gait, aspect, and mien. The loss of his eyes does not at all disfigure his countenance, but the history of their loss and his misfortune exalts to the highest our pity and veneration. On his death, and not till then, we may say, the line of Timur is extinct as a dynasty, beginning with the lame and ending with the blind. So now, I want more history, because he's talking about Timur the Lame, and I guess I didn't realize that Timurlane, as most of us would say, had anything to do with the beginning of the Mughal history in England, or in India. So now I want to find that out. And as usual, these books will lead me to something else. And all I can do is read, and then I'll know. Thanks for watching.